All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking, presented by FanDuel Canada, North America's #1 sportsbook, the place you should be locking in all your NHL wagers for this NHL season or hockey season. The video today, buy low, sell high, week 6. Last week we did goalies. Today we're just looking at players in general. I've got 5 guys, 2 guys to sell high on, and 3 guys to buy low on. Let's get into the video. All right, so the first guy we're going to be looking to sell high on is Brayden Schenn on the St. Louis Blues. Had a terrific week last week. 10 points in just his last 5 games played, or 9 points his last 5 games played. But if you look at where all these points came from for Brayden Schenn, it's not something I think that's going to be sustainable. Even if you look at where his season is at to this point, he has 10 points on the season. 9 of those came in his last 5 games, and actually 2 of those games he has 7 of his 10 points. So obviously one of those bigger games for Brayden Schenn was when they beat Colorado 8-2. I don't think St. Louis is going to be beating too many teams 8-2. Granted, they did just beat Tampa Bay 5-0, but I think they're on a little bit of a hot streak. I think we're going to see this offense come down to planet Earth at some point over the next couple weeks, and I don't think you're going to have any sort of higher potential value on Brayden Schenn at any point this season. He's currently the 55th ranked center, so nothing like too high, but if you look at where he ranks over the past, or since November has started really, he's one of the top centers in fantasy hockey just because of his point production, but I don't think it's necessarily going to last very long. His expected goals for number, not super high. It is high relative to the rest of the Blues players, but I think the only considerable player I want to have on my fantasy hockey roster on the St. Louis Blues is probably Jordan Kyrou. You can do a similar thing to what I'm saying with Brayden Schenn with probably Robert Thomas. I think he carries a little bit more value, but Brayden Schenn getting a little bit older up there in age, I don't think this is necessarily sustainable. He only has 28 shots on goal in 14 games played. That's 2 per game, and then his shooting percentage is 18%, a little bit higher than where we've seen his career average kind of iron out. So if you're trying to move Brayden Schenn for someone else right now, some of the guys I kind of had in mind that I wrote down that are a little bit lower than him, then I think will start outperforming him. One of those guys being Seth Jarvis. He has that center and winger capability. He's definitely a guy there. Adam Fantilli, obviously, if you're not in a dynasty or keepers league, definitely a viable option there. And then Ryan Johansson as well on Colorado. With some of the injuries on Colorado, I feel like Johansson will continue to get a little bit more traction going his way in terms of offensive opportunities. And then even Ryan Nugent-Hopkins right now, like I know this is a guy that was an absolute tank last year, a guy I wasn't really super high on right now, but I think he'll end up having a better season than Brayden Schenn. He currently has 10 points right now, so if you can somehow make a trade for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins that includes Brayden Schenn, I would definitely try to do that. All right, so the first guy we're going to be looking to buy low on is Dylan Cozens on the Buffalo Sabres. Obviously, this Buffalo team has really been struggling pretty much in all facets of the game. Their goaltending's been bad, defense hasn't been great, and then obviously their offense has really struggled. I think their last 6 games straight now, they haven't had a single game where they've amassed more than 30 shots. That's a little bit concerning. I think Dylan Cozens and the Sabres team will turn it around eventually. Dylan Cozens did miss a couple games here early in November. I didn't play in that game against Toronto and then one other game. But even if you look at his last 4 games played, or his last 4 games in November, his expected goals for number, pretty solid, 1.5. That's pretty good for a guy who just played 4 games. Doesn't really have a ton of point production to show for it there. Logged just 1 assist in that game against Boston yesterday. And then he also has 7 high danger chances so far in the month of November. This is just a guy I think that last year, obviously, we saw him break out. And I think that breakout is more of what we're going to see his level of play and consistency be for the rest of his NHL career. I think you're looking at his ice time right now. It's just under 16 minutes. I think that's mainly because of his injury. I think Don Granato's easily getting him back easing him back into the lineup, and I think we'll start to see him produce at a much higher rate at this point. Really low shooting percentage right now, just 9%, and still has a decent amount of shots there, 33 shots on goal, and I think that total will just continue to increase as the season goes along here. Just 8 points to show for in the 14 games played, but I think 2 or 3 of those games you can almost write off because I think he was maybe even rushed back a little bit quicker from his injury, and definitely a guy I could see still getting up to that 70-point range here. Last year, his shooting percentage was 15%, and he had more than 30 goals. I still don't think that's a crazy feat for Dylan Cozens to hit this year. He's currently the 80th ranked center, so you definitely probably don't have to give up a ton to get Dylan Cozens, but if you're trying to offload some centers, even maybe a guy like Brayden Schenn, I would definitely look in the direction of Dylan Cozens. All right, so the other guy we're going to sell high on this week is going to be Mark Scheifele on the Winnipeg Jets. 85% rostered, had one hell of a week, and the Winnipeg Jets, the last 6 games, or really since the start of November, have been playing fantastic hockey on the offensive side of things. 4 of their last 5 games, they've scored at least 5 goals. That's some really high-powered offense. I just don't think it's necessarily going to last, and I think Mark Scheifele, you're selling him at probably the highest value that you're going to have him at any point this season. 22nd ranked center. We've seen him definitely finish higher than that in years past. I just don't think this Jets team is built for him to continue to have this kind of success. He had 9 assists. He has 9 assists since the start of November, but his expected goals for is 1.56, which ranks 120th amongst skaters in the NHL. So you're not getting the goal production from Mark Scheifele. So if he's like one of your top tier centers right now, you want to have a little bit more goal production, because if you look since November, sure, he has 10 points. He has 1 goal and 9 assists. I'd rather have the guy that's getting like 5 goals and maybe 8 points instead of the 10-point mark with that many assists. Like, look, Kyle Connor has 8 goals in November. A lot of these assists coming from Mark Scheifele. Kyle Connor isn't going to have 8 goals in every 5 or 4 game span here. So I feel like this is why you're trading Mark Scheifele at his pretty much his peak value at this point. Just going off that explosion of the Jets offense from the last 2 weeks, pretty much, it's time to sell Mark Scheifele. Guys I'd be looking to trade Mark Scheifele for right now, honestly, on either ends, I think these are fine trades. If you can get Mark Scheifele for a guy like Sebastian Aho, I think getting Aho on your team right now, he's just starting to get hot. 7 points in his last 5 games played. Steven Stamkos as well. I think we'll see him start to contribute a little bit more on this Lightning offense. They've been struggling a little bit. And then honestly, I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but Wyatt Johnston, he's been an absolute man on that second line with Jamie Benn and Evgeny Dadonov. And I think that he'll continue to be able to produce at a pretty high level. One guy that it seems like Peter DeBoer is starting to trust a little bit more in a lot of different situations. But Mark Scheifele and this Winnipeg Jets team, I think it's time to move on from Scheifele, try to trade him for a different center or even a different player in general. So one guy it's time to buy low on, Kevin Fiala on the Los Angeles Kings. So 90% rostered, and you might think, what are you talking about? He has 14 points in his 14 games played. But if you look at his most recent play, it's been a little bit worrisome for sure. Hasn't been really as involved in this offense for whatever reason. Just hasn't had the point production that we've seen in years past. But I think there's a couple things here that will lead you to believe that Kevin Fiala will be a good fantasy hockey player moving forward. For one, he's got moved on that second line with Philip Deneau and Trevor Moore. Trevor Moore has been an absolute force on that line with Philip Deneau. He's tied on the team in goals right now with 7. I think we can see something similar for Kevin Fiala here, a guy who's definitely been able to dish it, but I think he's going to get up to his goals. I mean, this is a guy who over the last 2 seasons, last year had 23 goals, the year before that with Minnesota had 33 goals, so that's 56 goals total there, and about 150 points over those 2 seasons as well. I think he can definitely get back into that 70-point range again here. I wouldn't even be surprised if he hits the 80-plus point plateau this season, again, being back on this line. Because if you look at where his analytics are, it doesn't really match up. He's 4th in expected goals for on the team right now, but he just has 2 goals to show for it. He's having a little bit of a down period right now over the last 4 or 5 games played, only has about 2 points. But I think this is the time where you buy low on Kevin Fiala, because now moving into a little bit of a different situation. You know, now the other teams are starting to focus on Trevor Moore. Adrian Kempe has been an absolute beast as well recently on that first line with Kopitar and Quinton Byfield, who's a guy who's 136th ranked fantasy hockey skater. Definitely some pieces you can add in a trade to acquire Kevin Fiala, so I'd try to do that right now before we start to get hot. All right, so the last guy we're buying low on, a defenseman, a guy I was really high on at the beginning of the season, but has had a rough start to November, a decent October, but definitely some opportunity to buy low on him, and that's Condré Miller on the New York Rangers right now. 54% rostered, so if you're in one of those leagues, the 10-man league, he might still be available on your waiver wire, but if you're in a regular league where there's 14, 16 teams, I think this is definitely a guy that you try to trade for right now. A little bit concerning for sure. Just he has 7 points in 14 games played. That's not crazy. The biggest concern here, he only has 11 hits and 20 blocks. Very, very weird considering his style of play, and even the way Peter Laviolette kind of advocates for his defense and the way the style of play that they play under Peter Laviolette. He really likes to activate his defense offensively, but also people who play in those certain roles. Like Condré Miller is definitely a little bit more of a brute. You could see him hitting a lot more people, but Laviolette just moved him onto that top line with Jacob Trouba, or that top D pair. And then I think in that situation with Jacob Trouba, he'll start to get a little bit more hits, start to block more shots. He only has 20 block shots on the season as well. Shooting percentage right around 9%. That's pretty solid for a defenseman there. So I wouldn't go too crazy there. And then his time on the ice, he's playing 22 minutes per game. I think he'll still be able to get those residuals off a Rangers team that is starting to score at a much higher pace. You know, Artemi Panarin leads the team in points with 24. He's been awesome to start this year. It seems like Laviolette's figured out his top three lines now, moving Blake Wheeler up to that top line. You now have Artemi Panarin, Lafreniere playing with Trocheck on that second line as well, and I feel like that will just help the defenseman in that sense. Obviously, Adam Fox is going to come back at some point, but I think that will even help Condre Miller's production there. But yeah, just 5 hits and 7 block shots over his last 5 games played. So maybe a little bit of an increase there. If you're looking to provide in bangers leagues, I think this is a good guy to acquire because we know where he's been in seasons past when it comes to hits and block shots, and he's just not there yet. But I think he will start to get there at some point this year. He has 0 points over his last 5 games played, but he's top 35 in expected goals for. So he's being put in a lot of scenarios where they're in scoring positions for this New York Rangers team. I think Condre Miller will continue to be involved for the rest of the season. So definitely a guy I'd be trying to acquire before he starts to get a little bit too hot. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of this week's Buy Low, Sell High. Be sure to like and subscribe. Download the FanDuel Canada app. Lock in some gift parlays. Goal in the first 10, the most electric way to bet on the NHL this year. And I'll see you guys in the next video for the weekend preview.